So, continuing talking to the most interesting people here at RSA 2024, and so I ran into my old friend Maggie MacAlpine. So, Maggie, you did a lot of stuff. The first time we met was you were in Election Village at Black Hat. You were doing some election security stuff.
The DEF CON voting village, actually.
Okay, that was right. And then we worked together at a vendor for a little while and stuff. And one of the things I remember was I was bugging you to do some writing and write a blog. And you wrote this. You go, oh, let me see what I can whip up. And then you turned out this awesome blog talking about
how ransomware actors were similar to high seas pirates.
And then since this is now that was 3 years ago?
That was about 3 years ago, yeah.
And so you've done some more deeper research on this for this analogy?
Yeah, I actually even presented the talk at the U.S. Naval War College, which was kind of a pinnacle, but it was I thought there was the ultimate sanity check. I was like, if these guys think I'm onto something and don't laugh me out of the room, then there's something to this.
So give us kind of a walkthrough of this concept and this analogy.
So it first began when the Dark Side gang hit the Colonial Pipeline. And they said something very interesting. They said almost like an apology letter that wasn't quite an apology, but basically saying that they hadn't realized it was like a nation-state asset, that it was just a financial hit on their part. They were just honest criminals trying to make money. And that pinged me because I'm a huge history buff. I'm really fun at parties because all I want to do is talk about history. Because there was an arch pirate in the 17th century called Henry Every, who was once hit by the English for hitting English ships. The English let you operate with impunity back then, as long as you only hit the Spanish and the French.
Yeah.
But he was double dealing. He was also hitting the English. And he said, he disavowed it. He said, would have been only financial. I'm always an English friend. And the Dark Side quote, the apology, so to speak, sounded so similar to that. I began to think, well, that's kind of interesting. You've got these criminals who have to disavow having deliberately hit nation-state assets and say, no, and they hide behind that they were just financially motivated. I wonder if there's something to this. And I began to dig, and the deeper I dug, the more similarities I found between the landscape of pirates, privateers, which are like semi-state sanctioned, and like Navy in the early modern era when nations couldn't really project power fully onto the ocean. Kind of the way nations can't fully project it today in cyberspace. They still rely on businesses and vendors and others to also protect that space. And again, digging deeper and deeper, and the parallels just kept unfolding and unfolding. I just became obsessed.
So that's interesting because one of the things I've been writing about a lot lately is this the dual nature of ransomware and the plausible deniability, right? And then as I've had a few arguments with folks, then just 2-3 weeks ago, Volt Typhoon comes out.
Right.
And what do the Chinese get up there and say? Chinese government.
I'm assuming they disavow it, or
they said, "Oh no, these are ransomware actors. It's not us." Plausible deniability that they have there. Where maybe they're not directing, but they may be influencing some targeting. It could be working into their geopolitical aspirations and strategies. So.
Sometimes these guys are also moonlighting, so they are government officials, but they're allowed to like make their own money on the side and use ransomware tool for that, or maybe even nation-state assets for that sort of thing, but it's not like officially sanctioned. There's also that interesting space between, is it sanctioned or is it simply turned a blind eye to, and where do we draw the line there, and kind of what does that mean?
Yeah, nation-state tolerated.
Tolerated, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, we know for sure they're giving them safe harbor.
Exactly.
And it's kind of frustrating to see, hey, 3-year investigation by the DOJ, and we indicted 2 threat actors who will never get extradited to the United States.
Absolutely, so. Yeah. They're these safe havens, and again, the reason, just to pull up another historical parallel, the reason that America's first international war, which is against the Barbary pirates on the Barbary coast, happened, was in part because it's part of the Ottoman Empire, kind of, but like Algiers and stuff like that was sheltering piracy there. That was hitting up, American merchants and demanding huge ransoms. There's that word, demanding huge ransoms on the Mediterranean that America had to pay because they're no longer protected by England because of our revolution. This is kind of something I bring up as an attachment to the consequences of not understanding how fraught internationally these situations can be with these safe harbors, because the Algerian piracy problem was eventually brought to an end by France invading Algeria and taking it over.
Yeah.
So when people talk very casually about like, what are you going to do kinetically maybe to deal with these people, it's like, just so you know, we're still dealing with the outcome of France conquering Algeria. Like, this is still a geopolitical hot topic, you know? So like, just be aware that these are not casual conversations. These are long, centuries running impacts that come from dealing with threats like this, the state sanctioned or the state ignored ones. There is no simple solution.
Because meanwhile, I'm running around lighting fires, saying stuff like, "Oh, actually, the executive order that Bush implemented after 9/11
Right.
specifically has language that would be applicable to, say, a subset of ransomware attacks, such as the ones that are devastating healthcare,
Right.
ones that might target critical infrastructure." I think the consensus around like the Colonial Pipeline was that maybe they meant to hit it, but not have that big of a repercussion.
Right. But there was almost certainly people watching them who were taking close notice. So even if we believe the criminals are telling the truth, that they only meant to go after money, a lot of lessons were certainly learned, I'm sure. And then of course there is that question: are we going to believe them? They are in fact criminals. But also, what could have happened if they had been less obliging? Because Colonial Pipeline, the dark side, they were very obliging. They wanted the heat to go down, so they gave up the encryption codes, I believe. I think some ransom was paid, but ultimately that was resolved before the any really catastrophic things could happen. Because keep in mind, the largest airport in America, Hatfield-Jackson in Atlanta, fell under Colonial Pipeline's fueling, and was actually only a few days away, I believe, from running out of fuel. And that would have been not just
major hub,
not just travel, but shipping and all sorts of other problems could have absolutely hit. So had it been politically motivated, for example, somebody who says, no, we want political prisoners freed, or we want something that you can't give, which is America to withdraw from a country, for example, that could have been a much more persistent
And that's
attack.
usually where my argument is. There's no stated political, and you don't have to have a stated political, in my opinion, stated political goal to be trying to achieve, political outcomes, right?
Sure.
You don't necessarily have to advertise, but this is so. Tell me what you think about this dark side. I mean, obviously huge. You had President Biden out there talking about it and stuff almost immediately and stuff. Now we've got the Change Healthcare attack, which has arguably affected about 1 in 3 people in the nation. Much bigger impact, much bigger blast radius than Colonial, yet not quite as much of a discussion around it.
Well, that one, can you? There's been a lot of attacks. So can you give me the one sentence summary of this one? I've been following it, but I want to make sure I know all the details.
Yeah,
before
so
I say
this was a couple of weeks ago. A couple of months ago that they got attacked. But basically, the largest payment processor in healthcare, and so it shut down. I mean, there was insurers couldn't pay the healthcare providers. Healthcare providers were going down, but see, that's
that wasn't.
point.
For some reason, I thought that was mostly data theft, but this is actually they shut down the payment system.
They break some and stuff.
Yeah. So that was actually similar because Colonial Pipeline, they didn't do anything to the oil pipelines. That was also the payment processor that they went after, and that they themselves shut down everything else because they could no longer process payments.
That's interesting, right? So Change Healthcare is not a healthcare provider. They're much more of a financial.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting thing to find out about.
Well, I mean, that bank robber quote that goes, why are you going after banks? Well, that's where the money is. So I bet you there is a pattern there with them going after the financial payment processors rather than, the actual, whatever the company does, whatever their thing is.
Now let's take this back to your previous discipline with election security and stuff. Another critical infrastructure sector.
Sure.
Have we made improvements since the HBO documentary that you participated in?
Kill Chain. I've been a little withdrawn from it just because my professional world isn't quite taking me in there. There's been a lot of attention on the subject, and there's a lot of smart, capable people addressing the issue. But keep in mind, it's I don't want to say one thing one way or the other because I don't want to talk up or talk down the work that's being done there. But keep in mind, America is so scattered. Every state, every jurisdiction, sometimes down to the county or even township level, gets to determine its own elections and how they're conducted. So even if there's CISA's doing wonderful work, they're doing their best to protect America, that's all voluntary, as in the states have to volunteer to accept their help, and not everyone does. The states have the right to conduct their elections. It's a jealously guarded right. And there's sometimes pushback. So even if you were to say there's been wonderful progress in one state, the very nature of elections in America is that it would be on an almost case-by-case basis. And
Now, does that fragmented nature, I mean, because I've heard, let's say, utilities are very much similar. A lot of co-ops, a little, there's not one big North American grid, right? There's a whole bunch of little pieces of a large grid. Does that actually work in our favor for security in the meantime, or is that the big hurdle that we have to get over in securing these?
I think that is a very debatable point, because I believe there was a 2016 FBI report after the 2016 election that said that we owed some of our security to, in America, to the fragmented nature of it. But I want to push back on that statement, because there's actually only 3 major vendors of election equipment in the United States, which is ES&S, Hart Civic, and Dominion. And they're like 75% of the market. And then there's like 20 other players who make up like that last 25% or something like that on a regional basis. So I was a little skeptical, as was like the security community at the time, of this claim, only because it was like, sure, everybody's different and everybody's turning on different features and turning off others based on their local laws for election security, but there's actually only about 3 vendors that you'd ever have to like learn.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, let's take it back to the
Sure.
to the original, talking about your pirate analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so are there lessons in naval history that we can draw from in looking at addressing things like the ransomware epidemic and other systemic problems in security?
I think absolutely. I think that's part of why I was so motivated by it, was because to tie it all together, whenever we see a problem in the cyber and technological space, we go, in some cases we're dealing with problems that have literally never been dealt with before in the human history. And there's not very many things you can say that about. So in election security, right, one reason we always defer back to paper, I promise this ties in, the reason we always are telling people to go back to paper is we have hundreds of years of dealing with paper fraud. Hundreds of years of checking, ballots and things like that, as long as they're on physical paper, but we still can't authenticate fully, as everyone in the sort of cybersecurity community knows. It's still incredibly difficult to authenticate people online. There's no paper trail. There's no easy way to do like a hand count of digital ballots. That's why we say that we probably shouldn't have online elections just yet, because we just don't have that paper trail.
Sure.
Whereas we have hundreds of years of experience in the paper trail of actual paper. Now, so when I was looking at ransomware, I was saying, this looks like a whole new frontier. This looks like something we've never seen before, because by its very nature of being online and encryption and all this new technology. But then I saw that analogy with the cyber, with cyberspace as the ocean, and nation states projecting power, much as they did in the early modern 1600s, 1700s. And I went, oh, actually, maybe this isn't as new. And that's actually great. It's great when we can find something that we can build upon centuries of human knowledge. Humans are incredibly intelligent. We've dealt with these problems over and over again. And so you can look at it, things like, maybe bombing them from orbit's not a really good idea, or maybe like allowing letters of marque might not be a good idea, because actually letters of marque, privateers were allowed to fight pirates at one point, and to fight in semi-state sanctioned warfare between
Hackback.
and hackback and things like that. But it wasn't until the 1850s that a deal was struck by the powers of Europe to make privateering illegal. And that was because every time the war went away, the privateers all became pirates. Mm-hmm. So is that really a problem we want to invite, empowering all of these, right now, good
it's like
guys?
a mercenary force.
To become mercenary forces, and who says they don't turn on you or just go where the profit is? Now you've empowered all of them. So that was a genie that got let out of the bottle in the 1700s that they were shoving back in 1850. And by the way, America never signed that treaty, because we were the number one privateers, at the time, and we didn't want to do that. So it's like, just be aware that when you have that analogy at your disposal, you can begin to see, like, okay, Algeria just stomping on the people that were sanctioning, pirate activity or turning a blind eye to it, long-term ramifications. Letters of marque, privateers, long-term ramifications. But on the other hand, here's another long-term ramification to think about. America's Navy was started, John Paul Jones, right? He was a privateer. Privateers were a poor man's navy. So I was looking at Ukraine too and saying, they're inviting all these hacktivists and stuff to come help them out on sort of a privateer basis. What's that going to look like?
Sure.
When are we going to start seeing cyber warfare like navies, and is this the precursor to it? And is ransomware going to, as this sort of tool of piracy, not of internet piracy, but like piracy in the true original sense of the word, seizing your asset, holding it for ransom, things like that. Is that going to show a shape of what actual cyber warfare might look like someday? Not just the espionage, not just like...
Oh, absolutely. That'd be really interesting. And Ukraine especially because
Yeah.
the Ukrainians and the Russian threat actors were working together up until
Yes.
the point of the invasion.
Yeah, and what is that going to do, and what's that going to change? So mostly it was more questions than answers, but I felt the analogy allowed to hold up that mirror and say, here are some things we've learned. These are hard-won lessons from the past that are actually quite applicable here, and let's think about those before we rush into making those same mistakes again.
Fantastic. And where can they find out a little bit more of that and read some of your work?
So I have obviously there was that old blog post. I've got some presentations on it. I'm going to. I've yet to pull it together somewhere really like in one place. So you're gonna have to nudge me towards that to make sure that I actually do that.
All right, maybe
I've
I
recorded it a
can
few
help you
times.
do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can help me do that.
Fantastic.
But in the meantime, I'm at Sekion. I'd be remiss not to mention them. I'm their director of cybersecurity partnerships. So if you're around, please say hello. Come check us out.
I think I was the one who was remiss.
Yeah.
I mentioned that at the beginning.
Yeah.
I was so excited to jump into the analogy.
So I'm their evangelist, and I'm mostly just talking about cybersecurity threats and how we help small and medium businesses deal with them.
Excellent.
So so that's my little shameless plug. I figure I earned that one.
Well, thanks, Maggie, for letting me steal you away for a little bit
I
and
really
sharing this
appreciate
with
it,
us.
and I love talking about this. Obviously, thanks, Anthony.
All right, take care.